and you've not committed another felony offense since then, you still have the right to vote. You can go and register and vote in the election process. The second thing that Executive Order 70 did is reinstituted the application process. And I went and looked at the application earlier this week, and it went back to pre-Executive Order 42 considerations. It specifically asks about what your restitution amount is, what your fine is, what your court costs are, and then you have to put those down so that they can compare what percentage you have left to pay, so they can kind of track your progress. The other thing that strikes me about the application process is that, except for how current you are, all of the information asked is pretty much already available in the governor's office. Beginning in the mid to late 90s, our state government put together a criminal data warehouse. So we take all the information from reports, all the information from corrections, and we put it into a clearinghouse where you can pull that information out, so we have a seamless transition of information. So if the governor's office wanted to, they could just type somebody's name in, their offender number, maybe a social security or some type of other identifier, and be able to pull out what their criminal history is, what their, what county of conviction, how old they are. They can pull all of that information out just by going to the criminal justice information system. So in a lot of respects, the application process it really should only be about 2 or 3 questions, and it's still kind of labor intensive. So for example, if an individual wants to apply, he or she has to track down all of this information about where the conviction took place, the specific date of conviction, what the specific amounts were, and for lawyers, that's pretty easy because we do that all day. But for individuals who don't have ready access to the internet, or in rural areas of Iowa who don't have internet access at all, trying to gather all of that information can be labor prohibitive. And so when Rita and all of you go and visit with the governor's office or push your legislative agenda this year, I strongly encourage you to point out the fact that all of that information is already available, either through ICON or through the criminal justice information system. So what happened after Executive Order 70 in the Griffin Iowa Supreme Court voting case that just came down in March of this year? The Iowa Supreme Court recognized that Executive Order has had the effect of disenfranchising felons. In the opinion, it says, quote, following the issuance of Executive Order 70, more than 14,000 Iowans were disenfranchised in almost 4 years. Of all of those 14,000 individuals, only 100 had regained their voting rights. So we have a lot of eligible voters out there, people that we ought to be inviting back into our community because they've paid their debt to society. And because of the application process, it's really becoming a barrier. In addition to that research that I referenced earlier from the University of Pennsylvania, they went and looked at all of the individuals and really drilled down. They came to the conclusion that clear evidence existed that being subject to the application requirement reduced the turnout of ex-felons in Iowa in 2012, and they think the evidence suggests that it also reduced the turnout of ex-felons who were not subject to the application process. Simply because of the uncertainty, they were deterred from voting. If you didn't know Executive Order 42 was still good law, you weren't likely to vote. So there's been a dramatic shift with the reinstitution of Executive Order 70. I was glad to open up today's paper and see the press conference yesterday. The efforts of all of you to go out and to change that. I'll give you my 2 cents. I think the most easy way to do it would be legislatively, because the governor's clemency authority is subject to reasonable regulation. And I think a reasonable regulation would be to automate the process, similar to what Executive Order number 42 did. And that that is require that the Department of Corrections or some other state agency, once an individual's eligible in terms of being off probation or parole, out of prison, that information be automatically sent up to the governor for consideration. And remove the requirement that financial considerations be a barrier to being able to register to vote and participate in our democratic society. So, you know, I have two letters that I received that I still keep with me today. I mean, I still have the envelope that I took with me, and I've been out of the governor's office for 10 years now. I got a letter from Antonio Chalmers, who was one of those students. When we met with him in April of 2005, he sent me a very nice letter thanking me for taking time out of my schedule. And then here's why I kept it, because I think this is funny. If you ever decide to run for office, we'd like to work on your campaign. I can assure you, I'm not going to run for office, but I thought it was a very nice gesture. And I will tell you, I follow Antonio Chalmers every now and then. I'll check in to see what he's doing. He's still in the Cedar Rapids area. He's in IT and doing very, very well. So I really appreciate that letter. Here's another one that I got. Governor Vilsack received a letter through our website in 2005 after July 4th. And I won't disclose her name, but she gives a very heart-filled letter talking about her husband, who didn't come from a good family and had made some mistakes and was a felon. And she recounts a story where the Saturday after Executive Order 42 came out, she says her husband came in with a newspaper and said, "You're never going to believe this. Governor Vilsack just signed Executive Order reinstating the right to convicted felons." His eyes were filled with tears, and he said, "Lisa, I can vote." And so she was just sending Governor Vilsack a thank you note and telling the governor how meaningful that was. And Governor Vilsack took this and he wrote on it. He said, "Gary, this is why we do the work we do." And he didn't have to do that, so I've kept this with me as well. And so, you know, to tie that back, this would not have happened except for a small group of students committed to a very specific but important issue of criminal justice reform. So your voices, you know, all of our voices count. And so thank you for your activism. And I hope that you will continue to be activists on this issue and many other issues of important criminal justice issues, because simple things like reaching out to your legislators and looking for solutions can go a long way. So I'd be happy to answer any of your questions, but I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you today.
What was the holding in Barrage?
Oh, so, okay. The holding in Barrage, Mr. Barrage was convicted of distributing heroin that resulted in the death of another person. And the individual who passed away had not only heroin, but a handful of other drugs in his system. And so the question was, you know, was the heroin that was the cause, or was it the other drugs that were the cause, or was it a combination of both? And the standard was that if the heroin was a substantial factor, then that was good enough, which means a 20-year mandatory minimum up to a life sentence. But if the heroin was not what put it over the top, then he's only looking at a 5-year mandatory. So the unanimous decision of the United States Supreme Court, and I got to tell you, it's my favorite Justice Scalia opinion. Like only one of a couple of Justice Scalia opinions that I treasure, but he held that you had to show that heroin was a but-for cause of death. In other words, it's a higher standard of causation. As a result, the United States government agreed that the heroin was not a but-for cause. It was only one of many causes that resulted in death, and Mr. Barrage no longer has a 20-year mandatory minimum. Yes?
The mandatory minimums are a shame. And I have a son who is a felon at Anamosa. He did armed robbery. He held up a pizza delivery guy. I think he got 20 bucks. He got a mandatory 25 years. He was 20 years old. He could, as me and my sister would say, he could kill somebody and be out. He could have been out because there's no mandatory. So we have to do something about the mandatory minimums. It's not okay, it's not right. If we want a justice system, it needs to be just. You can kill somebody. Our governor's son killed 2 people. He's never done a day in his life. My boy did wrong. He needs to be held accountable for the wrong he's done. But should it take 25 years of his life to prove that he's not the same person that he was when he did that? What can be done about the mandatory minimum? I know nothing. I told him nothing can be done under Governor Branstad. He doesn't care. But something has to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you. If you're asking me what can be done, I think it's individuals like you telling a story about the injustices that are in the system. There are some people who, in my experience, there are some people who are just bad people, incorrigible, who will never be reformed. That population, the offender population, is so small. When I am defending a criminal case, when I get to sentencing, they do a pre-sentence investigation report, which tells the judge about the offender's financial history, education, health, family, all of that, work history. And I get these pre-sentence investigation reports, and they're all the same. Coming up from difficult families, undereducated, underemployed. A lot of people either have mental illness or substance abuse issues. But in 99.9% of those, if we address the root problem, then those individuals can be rehabilitated. And I think we need to be telling that story about rehabilitation in the criminal justice system. The other thing is, for a long time, it was such a political issue in terms of being hard on crime or soft on crime. I think that discussion's starting to change about being smart on crime. So, as you move forward and talk to individuals in your neighborhoods or when you're talking to legislators, tell them they need to be smart on crime. Let judges be judges. And there's a reason why we have a process for judges to be appointed. In Iowa, it's a very good process. Give them the discretion to make decisions on sentencings based on individual cases. And we have a board of parole that can do the same thing. Let the board of parole have discretion in these cases. If we took away mandatory minimums, those individuals that I referenced at the very beginning who are just incorrigible, who it doesn't matter what services you offer, they just will never be able to be reintegrated. The Board of Parole will pick up on that. I think the Board of Parole does a really good job in terms of identifying who are safety risks and identifying what programming needs. The question is making sure they get those needs once they're out. But it's only going to change with people like you sharing your story. And also, talking just about the cost. There's also a cost dynamic. In addition to the human dynamic, there's a cost dynamic. It's just not an effective way of spending taxpayers' money. It's every dollar, it's about $33,000 to put somebody in prison. And every dollar that you're spending is a dollar we're taking away from teachers. Right? Because we don't have enough money for teachers. And if you start shorting teachers, all you're doing is adding to that prison population in 18 years or 16 years. So in terms of investing taxpayer money, I think you can make a case, and you should be making a case to anybody who listens, that's not a good investment. The return on your investment of keeping somebody in prison is just not a good investment.
Have you ever missed a Springfield concert?
I've been to 14 Bruce Springsteen concerts. over to Europe to go see him because I wasn't sure if he was going to tour in the United States again. And I'm reading he's got an autobiography called Born to Run. If you like Springsteen at all, you have to read it. It's just a great book. And I got to tell you, my interest in Springsteen is my same interest in the criminal justice, in constitutional law. He talks about in his book, and he'll say it in his concerts, that he writes his music about talking about the difference between the American dream and the American reality. And I see a lot of that in the criminal justice system. Right? You see a lot of people who have been separated from the American dream for a whole lot of reasons. And I think, more restorative justice, I think you have the ability to try to bridge that gap or shrink that gap. So that's why I'm a huge Springsteen fan. That's why I have such an interest and passion in criminal justice and constitutional